Welcome. So great to have all of you here tonight. Thank you for joining us for NaNoWriMo Prep, a conversation with Grant Faulkner and Barbara Shoup. My name is Sarah Ginter, and I'm the programs manager at the Indiana Writer Center. We are a literary arts nonprofit that's based in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're excited to welcome people from all over the United States, so feel free to say hello in the chat box and let everyone know where you're joining from. Just a few housekeeping items. We ask that you remain muted, but invite you to keep your videos on. Throughout the program, feel free to submit your Q&A questions to the chat box. I'll be helping facilitate those questions later on in the program. Finally, there are two ways to view the event. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with Zoom by now, but there's a speaker view and a gallery view. So we recommend using either the speaker view for the first part of the program and then the gallery view for the Q&A portion so we can see everybody. And you can adjust this setting in the top right-hand side of your screen by clicking view. Okay, great. So, and now for our presenters. Barbara Shoup is the author of 8 novels for adults and young adults, as well as 2 books on the creative process. She is the former executive director of the Indiana Writer Center, the current IWC Writer-in-Residence, and a faculty member at Art Workshop International. Welcome, Barb.
Glad to be here.
Grant Faulkner is the executive director of the National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, and is the co-founder of 100 Word Story. He's published Pep Talks for Writers, 52 Insights and Actions to Boost Your Creative Mojo, Brave the Page, a teen writing guide, Fishers, a collection of 100 word stories, and most recently, All the Comfort Sin Can Provide. His essays on creativity have been published in the New York Times, Poets and Writers, Lit Hub, Writer's Digest, and The Writer. Welcome, Grant.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right.
All right.
Glad all you are here. It's very great. The side wonderful thing about the pandemic is Zoom. So we can have people from all over, which I really love. So welcome. I'm just going to jump right in because I know you guys really want to hear from Grant. But I am going to say first that I think it's really amusing that you're the executive director of NaNoWriMo and also 100 Word Stories. I mean, that shows a lot of breadth, right? I think that's really cool. So for those of you who might be new to NaNoWriMo, would you just say a few words about how it got started and how it's evolved over the years?
Yeah, it got started kind of, Chris Beatty, who's the founder, he would say it started accidentally. And I like that because I think a lot of great creative endeavors start accidentally. And sometimes I think we put too much onus on planning thoroughly. Sometimes things just happen. And so Chris woke up one day and he was an avid, passionate reader. And so he thought, hey, I'll write a novel. And he's like, how do you do about writing a novel? Like he'd never taken a how to write class or I don't think he'd read any how to write books, but he looked over his bookshelf and pulled out some of the more slender volumes, like think The Great Gatsby or Catcher in the Rye, did a rough estimate that they were 50,000 words, did some complicated calculus and figured out that you could write 50,000 words in 30 days. He wrote 1,677 words a day. And then he invited 20 of his friends to do it with him. And they showed up in coffee shops and they they did everything they did, we do today. That's what's interesting to me, is they had this, Chris has this concept, a goal and a deadline as a creative midwife. Don't wait until someday to write your novel. Do it today, because someday never happens. And then to do it with friends, because friends help you be more accountable. And they also add a certain kind of creative free zone. And the way that they enhanced creativity is they also made it fun. And they do these games or activities. And so they would challenge each other, like no one, or like they do like a contest. Whoever writes 500 words first will get a latte. And, so you had to output. And then after everyone is all caffeinated up, they'd say, you cannot go to the bathroom until you've written 500 words, and to this day, this is like the best writing motivator. And so yeah, everything they did, we still do today. We have volunteers around the world, even in Indianapolis and in Indiana, who organize gatherings like that, where people get together and they write together and they make writing fun and they hold each other accountable and they collaborate. And the way we've evolved to answer that part of your question. So I always say NaNoWriMo is 1 part writing boot camp, and that's the 50,000 word part, and 1 part rollicking writing party. And that's the, getting together with friends to write together. But the way we've evolved is we're now a year-round writing organization. We have a website set up so that you can enter a goal and a deadline for any writing project for any time period throughout the year. I always say we're Fitbit for novelists, but actually we existed before Fitbit. So really Fitbit is NaNoWriMo for walkers. And yeah, so we have other events like Camp NaNoWriMo, a more casual version of NaNoWriMo, which happens in April and July. We have our I Wrote a Novel Now What months, which are in January and February to help people with revision and publishing. And we just do a variety of things throughout the year.
Okay, cool. That's great.
Yeah.
Were you among that first 20?
I wasn't, but a good friend of mine, my best friend, was among the people the next year. So
Okay.
150 people showed up the next year. Then they built a rudimentary website in what would that
And
be?
where are we now?
2001. Yeah, well, 5,000 people showed up in 2001, and now we're about 500,000 people. And I should say that includes our Young Writers program. About 100,000 kids and teens participate in that, and we support about 5,000 classrooms with free materials.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah.
So what about all those people who say, how many novels does the world need?
I know. Why would they ask such a thing?
I know. I'm just saying, what do you say?
I know.
I
Well,
know what I'd say.
I usually have to compose myself because I get a little
Yeah.
churlish when I hear that, because I don't think we can have enough novels in the world. And I think they're coming at it from the wrong viewpoint. It's not about, usually they're thinking that because they're like, oh, we don't need any more novels on the bookshelves of Barnes and Nobles. We don't need any more published novels. But the thing that NaNoWriMo is all about, I mean, we've had a lot of people publish their novels with NaNoWriMo and become bestsellers and get awards and stuff. But NaNoWriMo is really about the I don't know, the divine spirit of creativity. People coming together to be creative together, to put their voice into the world, to be empowered to do that, to reach audacious goals. So it's so much. I view our success much more on other terms than just published novels.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I wonder, I sort of love you can't go to the bathroom until you've written 500 words. So could you share some other kinds of strategies that people use to prepare for NaNoWriMo and also to undertake it and go through the month of November?
Involving bathroom routines or?
Yeah, whatever,
Okay.
who knew? I wouldn't have thought that, but if it works.
Yeah. No, people have really elaborate preparations sometimes. I always say, I think, I mean, we have this ongoing conversation or debate or interrogation on whether people should plan and how much they should plan, or if they should pants. And for those people who don't know these terms, like pantsing means right by the seat of your pants. And so some people do, they show up on November 1st, they have no idea what they're going to write, even when their hands hit the keyboard, and they just go. And they have, generally, I've heard some of the people who have the best NaNoWriMos just with that spirit. But on the other hand, there are people who plan and they write, single-spaced 20-page outlines. They research for months. And that's fine too. I think the thing about NaNoWriMo is it's a creative experiment to begin with. So do what works for you. And I think you should do something different every year. Like I try something different every year. And then in the middle, we say that you're a plantser. So you kind of, that's what I consider myself. And that's actually what we've polled our people, and most people are plantsers, which means you kind of try to balance both.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
And I think I always use this quote from Robert Frost, where he said, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. And I think it's really important, at least for me, to write for a sense of mystery and unanswered questions. Like I'm writing to answer the questions in a way. Exactly. That's the purpose of the novel for me. And so I think even people with 20-page outlines, they should also write with that spirit.
I agree that sometimes the outline just doesn't want to be an outline anymore, and it wants to take you someplace else. And I think a lot of the time you can just trust that and let it go. And it's kind of like when you get that feeling that you're not exactly in charge anymore, or maybe that's when you're on the right track in some ways.
I think generally, like I have this one friend who does NaNoWriMo, and he always says, like, the moment where his novel goes off the rails, that's the moment. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, ride that Bronco.
Yeah, one of the things I've been saying to writing students who are interested in, you know, the long thing, as we call it, is that you don't have to write chronologically. So do people do that? I'm thinking about trying this myself this year. I've never done it before because I've never had the courage to do it. But I thought maybe I could do it if I just made a list of all the things that I know are going to be in this thing that I'm trying to work on. And then just let myself on any given day say, okay, I think I can write about this. And to just do that and see if at some point it starts to be a thread that I follow, or at the end, I just end up with a whole bunch of stuff that I can then sort of start to figure out what to do with it. Do you feel that most people do write chronologically, or?
I think most people do, but I think with just like what you're saying, I think there's something about human nature that we need to follow things in order. You know, like we feel like there's because things are numbered 1 through 20, we have to do that. But I do think that's a great technique. It's one I that use too. I oftentimes will structure my NaNoWriMo novel ahead of time, just like you did. I might have like 20 chapters. They might have a prompt or a topic for each chapter. If I get stuck in chapter 7 and absolutely hate writing that part, but I'm thinking chapter 13, that's what's really calling me. So I'll go write that scene in chapter 13 or chapter 18. And by the time I write that, I've replenished my creative juices so I can go back to that thing that blocked me. And I probably have new ideas for it. So I think
Yeah.
I call it skip noveling. It's good to kind of skip around.
Who knew it had a name? I like that name. And sometimes when you do it that way, whatever you're writing that felt like, okay, I can write this, will tell you something about the stuff that doesn't at that moment feel possible. And so you know, all of a sudden then you have some answers. I just love the process because it's so weird. And you know, the insights that happen along the way are, I don't know, they're like nothing else in the world. And for that reason alone, write a novel, right?
Yeah,
It's a wonderful process.
I totally agree that so much happens. You know, I often say that the NaNoWriMo novel is a planning tool unto itself.
Mhm.
Like writing the rough draft is one technique, one way to plan your novel. And I oftentimes will write that rough draft and then outline it after I've written the rough draft.
That's what I do too.
Yeah, so I call it the zero draft or the discovery draft. And I do think that there's so much interesting subconscious or unconscious percolation that goes on when you're skipping around a novel. I love this Joyce Carol Oates quote where she says, you don't know the first sentence of your novel until you've written the last sentence. And so
yeah, that can definitely be the case. And then sometimes you do know the first. So
yeah, it's true. It's true.
Time, Eudora Welty said, every story teaches me how to write it, but it doesn't teach me how to write the next one. And I've always loved that quote because I think it's so true. Are there strategies for people who finish successfully? Are there a few strategies that you find show up all the time that they have in common?
Well, I think the one thing I would emphasize is that I think that when I see people not succeed in NaNoWriMo, they're people who haven't thought about how they're going to open up time to write in November. And so they'll sign up, they'll be ready to go, but they won't really think, how do I open up like 2 hours a day for a month? And so I think especially if writing isn't part of the normal fabric of their day, they're going to need to think about like, can you minimize social media? Can you give up Netflix? Do you do power writing on the weekends? Do you write during your lunch period? I mean, our lunch break. I think the thing, like we underestimate the value of time management in writing great works of art. You know, you've got to like really, I think, evaluate how you're using your time and make sure that time's not happening to you, but that you're in control of how you use time.
Yeah.
And one thing I think a gift of NaNoWriMo is I always say that, you know, Picasso has this quote that we're all born artists. Every child is an artist. And then we forget how to be artists when we're adults. And that's because we let our to-do lists, all the practical things we have to attend to, take over. And NaNoWriMo allows you to put creativity back in the #1 position for just 1 month a year, you know, and to experience that. And so I just encourage people to come up with a strategy for how they're going to use time, how they're going to make that time happen so that they can write.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You would have to, I'm thinking about leaving town myself, at least part
That's
of the
great. That's a great strategy. Yeah.
which is
perfect.
Great.
Perfect strategy is to go to a cabin by the lake.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, have someone else do all the cooking.
I'll send you a postcard.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, I'm gonna say that, and if anybody tries to argue with me, I'm going with that.
yeah, tell them
You're
I
the
told you.
executive director, right? So,
Yeah, yeah,
okay, you just
yeah,
told me.
yeah.
What if you want to work in shorter forms? I know you do. How is NaNoWriMo helpful to you that way? Or is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I think it is different. I think as a creative process, it's a little different. I think it does work. Maybe at least for me, it works better with longer works, just
Mhm.
because that rough draft is so arduous, or can be, and so often like people don't reach the end. But I think it can work. I think the thing about NaNoWriMo is it's a creative process. I always say you can apply NaNoWriMo to a lot of aspects of your life. It's really about jumping in and trusting your creative abilities and improving, really. I mean, there's a lot of improvisational writing that goes on. And so I think it's a part of it is just a mindset. And so if you think about the rules for improv actors, the main rule is to say yes and. So if we're on stage together, Barbara, and you do something, no matter how wacky, no matter what it is, I've got to receive it and riff on it and do something in reaction. I can't like try to change course. And that's really what NaNoWriMo is about, is saying yes and to the story within you and your thoughts, and just trusting them. And so there's a lot of trust, a lot of banishing the inner editor, a lot of experimentation. And as with any improv, sometimes you go down the wrong path, but sometimes you have to go down the wrong path to go on the right path.
Well, that's absolutely right. And sometimes the wrong path will yield something.
Right.
Something different. You have to love that, I guess, as crazy as it makes you. You have to love the process. I'm going to segue to you now,
Okay.
and your new collection of stories, which I allowed myself to sit down and read the whole thing today.
Wow.
I
Thank
think
you.
that was really a great way to do it,
It
because
is.
it's fresh in my mind. I love the title.
Thank you.
All the comfort sin can provide. And I have to say, I love your stories, and some of them are super short and some of them are more traditional length, but I found myself really drawn in to the lives of these people who, I mean, they have simple but such complicated lives, and the struggling with relationships, and really the comfort sin can provide is exactly what it's about, which is very cool. One way or another, what everybody else thinks of as sin comes into play the stories hinge on that. So that's cool that you found so many different ways to speak about that one thing. Would you maybe you could read a flash piece or just something, whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, first, that's so nice, just what you said about the book. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I truly enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. I picked out, I think the funny thing about publishing a book like this is what you hear from readers. And there is one story in here that actually it was just rejected a lot, and rejected to the point that I just lost in confidence in it, and stopped sending it out. And then I decided to publish it in this collection because I still liked it. And I heard from so many readers that this was their favorite, and that was such a nice surprise. And I've never read it. So before this, I thought, well, I'll give it a little airtime. See,
All right.
So this is, as you said, there are some very tiny 100-word stories in this, and then there are some that are more like a conventional short story length, which would be, in the more like 15 to 20 page range. And so this is a more of a conventional story length, and it's about a middle-aged woman who goes back to her college reunion, and of
I love
course,
that story.
college reunions are full of drama.
Oh yeah.
Of some sort. So it's called I Just Want to Feel It. And I'll just read the beginning, of course. When Monique opened the door of the hotel room, she was surprised to see them all there, sleeping, undisturbed, safe. Jacob had kicked his sheets off, and now they were crumpled at the end of his knobby legs. He looked like he was still at play in his Batman pajamas, his tousled hair falling over his soft cheeks. Julia slept next to him, but she'd scooted to the edge of the mattress, searching for more space from her brother, more space from everyone. She slept with a frown, strands of long, stringy hair framing her face. She was only 13 years old, but it seemed as if she was already ready to move out of the house, get in a car with a rebel boyfriend, and drive away. Monique could hear the screams of fights that had yet to happen. Greg breathed deeply, as if emerging from one of his deep sleep apnea episodes. She'd been afraid that he would wait up for her. She didn't want to answer his questions about the reunion tonight. His probing, innocent as it might be, could seem like a crowbar. Uttering a single word felt like labor under his expectant, eager gaze, and she wouldn't be able to deflect his questions tonight. He'd ask her where her shoes were, why she was out of breath, how she'd cut her arm. He lay on his back in the middle of the bed, his arms sprawled across the mattress, as if waiting for her to lie down next to him and snuggle. He liked to spoon her each night and fall asleep with his arms around her. She preferred to go to sleep alone, but she'd somehow never been able to tell him that, even in 20 years together. Her mother had warned her about men, said most of them were bad, implying that women were good, all women, unless they were with a bad man. She said this through the clouds of smoke in her kitchen to the tinkling of ice circling around the bottom of an empty tumbler of sloe gin. No love deserves the death it has, she said. But Greg was a good man. He never forgot anniversaries, always remembered Mother's Day. He'd spend an entire Saturday with the kids, playing Go Fish and building forts and playing ping pong. He always planned special Christmas gatherings, gingerbread cookies and hot chocolate, a log in the fireplace, as if they were a family in a commercial. He saw the world through eyes that didn't understand why anyone would do harm to themselves or others. For a moment, she wanted to wake him up and feel his arms around her, but then she thought of his hands pawing her thighs, his breath thick and wanting, his eyes promising her all of the security in the world, like a safety belt. She watched his stomach rise and fall with each inhalation. Since the kids were born, he'd begun to show a paunch. Life tended to slide. He'd purchased a punching bag and set up a home gym in the basement. He went down at night and exercised to the Rocky soundtrack, and then he'd come up, flexing his muscles, shadowboxing, proclaiming that he was ready to fight in the championship. She pictured herself standing above him on the bed, holding out a rock and dropping it into his puffy belly. His eyes would open with a quick start, pained and afraid and helpless. And there she'd be, standing above him. She hated the things she knew.
Great line. She hated the things she knew. And
Thank
sort of
you.
isn't that why a lot of us are here? We hate the things we know, so we have to put them someplace. And fiction is a good place to do that. I hope the collection does well. I really, like I said, I really like it a lot.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. How about some questions from you
Yeah.
guys? I see one question. Well, actually, several have popped up. How did you get started writing, and what motivated you? Where do you get your material?
How did I get started writing? You know, I think I was one of those people who knew I was a writer from before I could write or read. I always felt like I was a writer. I guess when I very tangibly became a writer, I was a sophomore in college, and I was deciding between whether I should be an econ major or an English major. And I very fortunately went to France and studied abroad for a semester and basically just sat in cafes reading novels. And so there was no going back from there. And I jumped into it. I think, like, when I think back to when I first became a writer, you know, I strangely just recklessly jumped in when like after college. I had no plan B. It took me a long time to figure out that I needed a plan B, you know, and then I think I spent years looking for a plan B, and very fortunately found jobs that supported me as a writer and in the field of writing.
Yeah, that's a good, I jumped in too. I jumped into the novel, which was really insane.
Yeah, the novel is insane for those people out there. It's a huge I do compare it sometimes to being a business person. You have to be entrepreneurial, you have to take risks, you're
Yeah.
writing it all on spec, no one's paying you ahead of time for it. So
Well, and talk just a little bit maybe about the difference between a short story and a novel in terms of the nature of the idea, because they're so different.
they are, it's fascinating. I mean, short stories are really hard to pull off, you know, like the story that I just read from, that went through innumerable drafts. And so, like, it's not like a short story is easier. In some ways they're harder because of their brevity and because you have to, whatever, balance out so much to express things. Like a novel, I would say a novel's like a southwestern city. It's like there are no boundaries. You can just keep building, you can just keep expanding. But like a short story, you build it on a little confinement of land. It has to fit on that land, and you have to be very smart about how you use that scarce resource, the land. But that said, like when I was saying, a novel is this amazing leap of hope. I mean, most people, I mean, sometimes I know people who do finish novels, like a novel a year. I'm not one of those people. It might take me 3 years, 5 years. It could take me 10 years. I've worked on some novels 10 years. So there's a huge, depending on what you want from it, if you want publication, that's a huge commitment of time. It's like you're going through a first marriage or something like that. It's just a big commitment. And you're going to go through so many different phases, like mental phases with it. You're inevitably going to have periods of self-doubt. You know what I mean? You're just going to hit the wall again and again and again. So I think it really is, it's like a marathon or climbing a mountain. I mean, I don't know what metaphor to use.
Yeah, well, like a marathon versus a 5K.
Yeah, that
would be, you train differently and you prepare differently.
You do train differently.
Yeah.
Takes a different kind of stamina.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people feel, and unfortunately publishers sort of do this to you, if you're a really good short story writer, they want the novel. Or the short story writer feels like, well, I haven't grown up until I've written the novel, but I don't really think that's true. I think, people who are wonderful short story writers shouldn't feel like they have to. It's just what kind of ideas come to you, I guess, more than anything.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest sort of misperception that's sort of like permeated the writing world, is that you have to learn to write a novel by writing short stories first. I see no truth in that.
No, I don't either. I really don't. And of course, the novel is so hard to teach. So, NaNoWriMo is great because it brings people together all trying to do that crazy thing and builds a kind of community around it. And I just think community generally is so important for writers.
It is. Yeah, it is. And I think
what it's like other than us. So we need us.
Exactly.
To keep ourselves going, which is really important. Someone asked to hear you speak about solidifying point of view.
Yeah, I don't know what they mean by that.
That would be Christine B. Are you out there? Do you want to? All right, we'll skip that for a minute and go on. And if Christine wants to type in, clarify that a little bit. And then Katie Price asked, do you do a lot of revisions between submissions? If you get turned down a lot, do you revise or do you stick with your original material?
I love that question because I think rejection plays such a role in a writer's life and even their creative life. And I try to view rejection as a gift. And so what I do, especially with short stories, is I'll send them out, maybe to 5 journals, maybe 10. And inevitably that first round of submissions is I'm rejected. And so, but the gift of rejection is it helps me look at the story differently. I'm usually looking at it more attentively through the eyes of an editor. Usually some time has passed, which gives me more objectivity. And so then I go in and revise again, and then I'll send it out again. And so some stories can take years to publish just because of that sort of rhythm of sending it out, getting it rejected, revising. And so I only quit revising, I guess, truly, like I think that I usually do reach a point where I have finished the story in my mind. And so if it's not published by then, I'll still keep giving it a chance and putting it out there, hopefully. But yeah, I love that cycle. And actually, and I think that's good for writers. I mean, rejections can obviously feel horrible, right? They can just be devastating sometimes, but they are like also a valuable part of the creative process. And I think it's like, if you view them right, they will be a gift to you.
Yeah, I think that's right. You can't really see what your own words on the page are doing. Because you bring everything that you know about the story to the page. So for someone that can tell you what's there and what's not there, that is a great gift. And once you start to think of it that way, it's, rejection never is happy, but you can learn something sometimes if somebody's willing to give you some, some thoughts about what's working and what's not working. All right, let's see. Somebody says, this is Eric, this is my second year teaching creative writing, and my students are, quote, manipulating me into NaNoWriMo this year. I've never done it with an audience cheering me on, and I don't really know how to handle their attention and interest. How do I use this constructively for all of us? That's a great question.
Well, I think there's no better way to teach creative writing than for the teacher to write with the students and just to share very authentically in that experience. You know, we all become vulnerable when we write. We all face obstacles, and then we also have these wonderful breakthroughs. And so I would just go with it and write with your students and think of yourself as a fellow student of writing. Don't think of yourself as an authority who has to have all the answers. I think your students can probably guide you as much in your story as anybody else can if you give them the chance. And it's interesting, that question, because I can't tell you how many teachers, like everyday teachers who we've had who've written with their students. And because of students sort of like pressuring them to write, I know some teachers who've written novels and published them with major publishing houses as a result. So you never know where it's going to lead. But I love hearing when teachers write with their students.
Yeah, I think students really respect teachers who are willing to put themselves out there. You know, it's like you're saying to them what you expect of them as writers. Why not expect the same thing of yourself? And I think it can make a huge difference to them. I think
Yeah, absolutely.
I missed a question here. Is this project appropriate for me as a new writer who has written 90K words, pantser style, and is at the massive editing stage?
Well, we do have, you can be what we call a nano rebel. And so I think you can use this goal framework approach to any stage of writing. And I think it really does work. I think one thing that writers do is they kid themselves about how much they're actually working. You can kind of sit down to work and not really do much writing. But if you like, for revision, I would suggest, instead of thinking of it as a word count for the month, think of it as the hours. Like we always say, an hour of revision is worth 1,000 words. So you could say, have the same goal, but instead of writing 50,000 words, you do 50 hours of revision in a month. And so I do think the goal deadline approach works for that as well. It's just a way of focusing yourself and making time and making it happen.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. It is the time thing in the end with this.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to tie yourself to the chair and do it.
Exactly.
Turn off that editor, which is not so easy, but let's see. Oh, someone asks, where, if anywhere, can you get the same gifts you get from rejection if you want to publish independently?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go, I think rejection might be the wrong way to put it in terms of going out and looking for rejection, but looking for constructive feedback, perhaps in this case, by joining a writing group or giving your writing to somebody who you trust to give you good feedback. I mean, I think like a lot of writers, when we give our writing to someone, I mean, ideally, we are thinking best case scenario, they're just going to love it. That's what we want, right? We want to be loved. We want the story to be loved. But if you're looking for feedback, if it's not a finished story, you're not going to get 100% love, right? You might get some great encouraging moments, but you're going to hear feedback, and that feedback even can feel like rejection. So I think, like, I don't search out feedback for my writing. I think sometimes it's overrated, and people do it too early in the process, but everyone's different with it. And so I think if you like feedback and like to share your stories, then I would just like think about who you can do that with, and if they're going to give you the type of feedback you wanted. Like, I think, Barbara, you mentioned this earlier, that one great part about a community of writers is that no one else can kind of understand what you're going through unless you're a writer. And that's the same with feedback. You know, like, I've given my stories early on when I first became a writer. I gave them to a friend, and he never said anything about the stories. He never replied. And I asked him one day, I was like, why didn't you say anything about the stories I gave you? And he's like, well, I didn't ask to be your critic. He said, I'm your friend, not your critic. And that's legit, right? That was totally legit. And that was like one lesson for me, is to you know, not only like think about who I give the story to, but think about what I want from them. And so I tend to guide people and ask them questions in order to kind of get like something very focused that I can work with. Because so often too, people, it's hard to critique somebody's story. They need guidance. And so give them some questions to answer.
Yeah, I think, and also it's not about what you like, but about what works. And so, you know, it's where
Exactly.
is it working and where do you feel confused, or I don't have enough, or there's too much. And so, yeah, I think, and that's not tied to self-publishing. That would be true for anybody with any kind
Exactly.
of publishing goal. So I missed a question here. I think Bethany says, as a newbie to NaNoWriMo, what is the one thing you recommend to do before November 1st?
I think I'll tell you this. Let me think. 3 or 4 pitfalls that people tend to do. One is they write a story they think they should write, not one that they're passionate about and want to write. And I think writing the story you want to write and the one that you're passionate about will make you'll write it better. You'll write it so that other people want to read it. And when I say should write, sometimes people think about what's the market want right now? Are vampires trending? Things like that. And the thing is like, again, you want to write the story you want to tell. So focus on that. And that will give you strength too. That'll help you overcome self-doubt. That'll help you I always say you want to have a why. Why are you writing this? What does it mean to you? And that helps give you a why. And then I think the other things are really just about what I said about time management, really thinking about how are you going to structure your life so you can write. And also this like community, like how can you, community doesn't only have to be writers. Like a lot of people, like for instance, accountability can be just telling the world on Facebook that you're writing a novel. You have built-in accountability right then. You don't want to bump into anyone in the grocery store and have them ask you how your novel's coming and to tell them that you quit. They say the best way to quit smoking is to tell other people that you're quitting smoking. And that goes for novel writing as well. And also, just like, telling your family members, your friends, a lot of people like will tell their family members like, hey, I'm going to prioritize novel writing this month. So if you can help out with the dishes, if you can help out picking the kids up after school, whatever it is, getting help from the people around you so that you get that time to write.
Yeah, I like that. Let's see, another one is, logical question. NaNoWriMo is draft 1 or 0. What comes after that?
Yeah, if you want to finish your novel and publish it, a lot of revision. I can't, there's an old saying that writing is rewriting, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I'm somebody who hates the first draft. That's why I like NaNoWriMo, is it gets me through that first draft pretty efficiently and quickly. I love revising. I can just noodle around with the novel forever. And so, at least from the NaNoWriMo, from our programs, we do I Wrote a Novel, Now What, which is in January and February. But we have activities throughout the year to help people revise and think about publishing options if they want to. Yeah.
I like the revision. That's my favorite thing too. I love it. Toni Morrison called it the delicious part.
Yeah,
Which
I love that.
It's cool. Yeah.
It is the delicious part. You get to savor, you get to go deeper, get to clean up that messy room of your novel.
Somebody says, I have a vague idea of the story I want to explore in the genre of historical fiction, Berlin, World War II. Sounds interesting. Someone forced to go into hiding, but it's been hard for me to feel into first person versus third person versus multiple points of view. I feel caught up in my head about it and don't want it to keep me from getting started. Hopefully that is somewhat clear. I've always been a journaler, but I am new to fiction.
So the struggle is this point of view. I always have a very intuitive sense of the point of view I want to tell a story, and I've actually never really struggled with it. So I'm curious what you would say, Barbara.
Often it's been intuitive for me. However, in a couple of cases where what I was trying to do with the first draft failed, I had to look at what I had, and in each case, I had multiple points of view, and I had to decide which character had the most at stake. And so then I used that character as the point of view character. It's tricky. Point of view is really tricky.
Yeah, it
Someone
is.
said it was like walking on stepping stones. That you tell the part of the story that person needs to tell, or third person, first, whatever. And then when that ends, you go to the next one. So you're constantly thinking about which person is the best person to tell that part of the story, any given part of the story. But I also think if it's your first novel, it's always, I'm saying this having jumped into the novel myself and done a multi-point of view, so I should just shut up. But anyway, sometimes it's easier to do a single point of view. But who knows?
Yeah, I think if you're really struggling with this, I would just play around with it a little bit. Write it in first person and see how that feels. Write it in third person, see how that feels. Again, it's always been intuitive for me. I think it probably has something to do with how close you want to be to that character. You know, if you write in the first person point of view, you're going to really want to get into that character's emotions or their expressiveness, you know, the way they express themselves. Or you know, maybe less so, like the Great Gatsby is told from in the first point of view, but it's all about that person being a witness to other people. So there's a lot of different ways to handle it.
Yeah, sometimes I think no matter what you do, the reader sort of decides on one character that they believe is the main character. So that's something to throw in there too, in terms of thinking about it. And so who's the most important character, who has the most at stake, and then how do those different multiple points of view illuminate that and let the reader know what they need to know.
Yeah,
it's hard. What is Camp NaNoWriMo?
Yeah, I didn't get to explain that much. Thanks for asking that. Camp NaNoWriMo is a more casual version of NaNoWriMo that happens in April and July. And by more casual, I mean that we don't have the kind of strict 50,000 word goal. So it can be a goal of any length, can be 10,000 words, can be 100,000 words. It can be any genre of writing. So you can write a script, you can write an epic poem, you can write a collection of short stories. And so it's just more open and loose. And then we don't have our municipal liaisons, the volunteers I said that are around the world. Most of them or many of them are only there during the NaNoWriMo season in the fall. More and more of them are doing activities and organizing groups throughout the year, but we don't have any formal oversight or formal plan for volunteers in camp.
Okay, one more question, and then you've got an exercise for us, right?
I will make one up. Yeah, I forgot about it. I've got it though. I've got it. I've got it.
If we get to a point in our draft and realize we've made a mistake in our novel, it's just not working, and we feel inclined to start over, is it a good idea to start again during NaNoWriMo, or should we just continue until we finish the draft and fix things up after NaNoWriMo in the second draft?
I think the latter. You know, NaNoWriMo is so much about progress, and that's, I think, one of its creative benefits is not to get too hung up on fixing things. I mean, I'll give myself as an example. Before I started with NaNoWriMo, or the first time I did NaNoWriMo in 2009, the way I would approach a novel is I would write the first chapter and then I would endlessly revise it. I would just revise it over and over and over again, which was a kind of creative paralysis. I wasn't moving the story forward. And just to go back to that quote from Joyce Carol Oates, is you don't know the first sentence of your novel until you've written the last sentence. Well, what I was doing was just wasting time, in the sense that by the time I did write the rest of the novel, when I went back to revise it, I would inevitably cut that first chapter that I'd spent so much time on, or change it greatly. You know, like I've talked to so many novelists, and I think that the standard percentage is only about 10 to 20% of that first draft ends up in your final draft, you know? So don't get too hung up on what's wrong with that draft. I mean, the premise of NaNoWriMo is to get through it and then revise it and perfect it later.
Don't you also think that the middle of a novel, it's almost everybody gets like to a certain point and they're like, this is a terrible idea, I have to quit.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Absolutely. It happens to almost everybody.
Everybody.
So just
I'll say everybody.
like you don't think that.
Yeah.
Just keep going anyway. That's what Virginia Woolf said anyway. And
Yeah.
you know, she's got good creds, but yeah, keep going no matter what. You could be wrong too.
Exactly. And I
think it's maybe better than you think.
I think it's very important that you pointed that out, that every novelist questions themselves. When we were talking about novels taking 3 or 5 or 10 years, you go through those moments where you just don't believe your story's any good, and you just have to trust that it is and keep going. Because the next day, tomorrow, or the next week, you might be like, this is a work of genius.
Yeah, I haven't had that moment yet, but I'm hoping that I will get there someday, and that I would be right. That would be.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing.
Could go either way.
You're
okay,
probably...
give us an exercise.
Yeah, well, I will give this exercise. Let me think. how to contextualize it. If you know what your story is going to be for NaNoWriMo, or if you have a short story you're working with, I think it works for that if you already have the character. Otherwise, I think maybe just write it from your own point of view as a sense of exploration. But what we do in NaNoWriMo a lot in these like gatherings where people come together with the volunteers, or like Chris Beatty with his friends, is we do writing sprints. And a writing sprint is simply a prompt and then a timed writing exercise. In this case, we'll do it for 5 minutes. And so the prompt will be, and really write improvisationally. Let yourself just write as much as you can. Don't think about the writing, just write. And so I think, like, I have a problem with character background sheets. I know a lot of people use them and love them. I don't like them. I like to put characters in situations that reveal their sense of the world. And so one of the ways I like to do this is to think about how your main character reacts when someone cuts in front of them in line. So think about a line at Starbucks or grocery store. And so this gives a sense like, will they get mad? Will they seek revenge? Will they complain? Will they forgive? Will they just step back meekly and not, speak up? Like, it's all about how they feel their power in the world and how they enact that power. And so that's the writing exercise for 5 minutes. And again, if you don't have a character, write about how you react to somebody stepping in front of you in line and why you react that way. So I will get on my timer. If you want some bonus time, start now. 5 minutes. Okay, we're halfway through, 2.5 minutes. one more minute. And stop. So sometimes at the writing gatherings that we put on, there might be a contest, something at stake, like the ones that I mentioned with Chris Beatty at the first of this. So if people want to put their word count into the chat, that'd be great, or how many words you wrote during that exercise. If I was there in person, I would give away some sort of prize to whoever wrote them both.
Darn.
Yeah. So feel free to do that. And then sometimes one of the things I love is that sometimes people will share their worst sentence they wrote. And I think that this is fun because I think so often when we're so many times when writers gather together, they're all trying to be the best in the room. And I think it's good just to kind of share your foibles as a writer. It gives you humility. It adds to the whole kind of whimsical approach of writing, that what comes out, what isn't always good. And sometimes it's just fun to share what's, I don't know, bad or mediocre or even interesting for some strange reason. You can also share your favorite sentence. Don't feel bad. But anyway, it's nice just to share, I think. But we have a lot of great word counts here. Got 197, 214, 277. Katie Price, I think you're in the lead. 252 from Suzanne. Katie, I send you, I don't know, a really expensive bottle of champagne virtually. But that's great. And you know what I think is really interesting is that I've done this exercise, writing sprints, literally hundreds of times, so thousands of writers. I've never experienced one writer not be able to write. Mm-hmm. And so this is my scientific proof of why writer's block doesn't exist. I think that it's oftentimes we create a block by calling it writer's block, and that we just need to sit down and find a way to open the door, and let the words out, because our words and our stories are just waiting there to gush out, right? And then we do a writing sprint and 252 words come out in 5 minutes. That's amazing. What did you think of the prompt itself, Barbara?
I thought it was hilarious, and I wrote about myself, but then I had this hilarious memory about my mother, who she was British, cue breakers. God forbid you would ever break the cue, but she was so polite that when she learned how to drive, it took her forever not to stay at a four-way stop forever.
Yeah.
Because she would want to let every person go. She would wave, and it was like hazardous because she would sit there forever, and that's just how politeness can get you in trouble.
Exactly.
So,
yeah,
it's a telling sort of thing how people would, how they would react to that. It tells you something about them.
I think it
does.
And
I agree. Put a character in a scene and see what they do. That's the best way to figure out who they are, and certainly the most entertaining.
Well, cool. Any other reactions here about the writing exercise? So distracted by a daughter. That's a crucial part of NaNoWriMo, is learning how to be creative with the inevitable interruptions that present themselves in our daily life. Yeah, start thinking about why someone would cut. That's interesting. You could take it from the other person's point of view, somebody who feels entitled to cut, or they're just reckless enough to cut. I mean, it really is a telling character trait about how we proceed in lines and what sort of entitlement we feel. And that's, to say, I don't entirely hate character background sheets, but the thing I don't like about them is that I usually get bored by them, because I'm just kind of listing things like the character has blue eyes or short brown hair or something like that. And I feel like I really want to know the soul of the character. And sometimes I look at novels and there's very little detail or detail about the character. It's more about what's interesting is the conflict that the character gets into and the essence of that character. And then the reader, like, we kind of fill in a lot of gaps, you know, we'll fill in what the character's dressed like, or even, you know, hairstyle and stuff like that as well. So I think, like, as a writer, you need to trust your reader.
Yeah, you can ask yourself questions too, not so much about character traits, but things like, what is the character afraid of? You know, what is the character's biggest secret? And thinking that way, sometimes you really get some stuff you can work with.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's still more fun to just let them tell you who they are.
Yeah, I generally trust that method, letting them tell me who they are.
Sometimes I'll even write at the top of the page, type at the top of the page, who are you and what are you doing in this story? And let the character answer. And I know it sounds totally nuts, but it works. So try that.
Yeah, I was going to say, the other thing I like about this exercise is a lot of writers shy away from conflict. And this exercise puts your character in immediate conflict with the world. And I think that that's what you're going to want to do with the novel, is to think about, like, you know, putting those conflicts in place and have them be constant. Like Nabokov used to say that he was, what do you say? He said he put his characters under his thumb, like he was the kind of evil god, really. He just wanted to put them through hell. And if you think about some of their favorite stories, it's like we are cringing with excitement because the character's just being put through hell, you know, worse and worse situations.
Yeah, here's another cool thing that you can do. You can think about before and after, like what moments in your character's life does that character say before and after? Like it might be a death or a marriage or anything. It could be small or it could be large, but any of those moments in a life, you know, where something is just different after it happens, there's just a wealth of conflict and scene and tension. So that's a great little trick to get at a character too.
Absolutely. You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, Barbara, because I'm like somebody who doesn't consider myself a good plotter per se. I've always kind of struggled with it. Yeah, but I read Stephen King's approach to plotting, because he actually doesn't write an outline for his novels, but he just says you put a character, the character goes into a situation and leaves the situation, and leaves differently. So just what you said, the character, like, that little tension or drama changes the character. They have to face something in themselves. And that's a great way to be a plot for me, is I'm just writing about situations.
Yeah. Yeah. Tony Hillerman, great crime writer, had an aging character. And when I interviewed him one time and I asked how that changed over time, because he let his character age. And he said plots changed because the character couldn't do the same physical things that he could do as a young man. So he had to think about plot differently. But also he was smarter. And there were things he wouldn't now do because he was a wiser person than he had been as a young man. And so there are a lot of things that can go into thinking about what a plot is. And it's not just, this is what happened, but sort of, why did this happen? And why did it happen to this person? So it's, it's kind of like taking ballet class, and you got to get all your body all settled. And as soon as you get your left foot the way it's supposed to be, the rest of your body goes bad, so it's just like there's so many things going on at the same time. And that's why really revision is such a comfort, right? Because you get it every time, you get it better.
That's right. Get to go deeper. Yeah, I love that about Tony Hillerman's characters. Anything else here in our chat? Any other questions?
I think we're there.
Are we there? Ask a final question if anybody wants to.
I think.
But it's great to see so many writers and so many people talking about signing up for NaNoWriMo, so I hope that's the case.
Yeah, and you go to do that on the website, right?
Yep, NaNoWriMo.org. Everything we do is free. You got nothing to lose. Got nothing to lose except the novel. Except the novel you don't write this November. So you got everything to gain. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Eric, Marty, Jennifer, Julie. Wow. Thank you so much, everyone. This is really nice.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks so much for doing this with us at the Writers Center.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure and lovely talking with you, Barbara.
Yeah, great talking to you too. Really enjoyed it. Good luck.
Good. And lovely to see your Kurt Vonnegut doll behind you.
Oh.
The
Yeah, well,
birthplace of Kurt Vonnegut,
yes, that's
Indianapolis, right?
And home of the Kurt Vonnegut museum, library and museum.
I know. I want to go someday.
You should come back and teach a class again, and I'll take you there.
Good.
They're my
Okay.
friends.
All right.
All right then.
I'll take you up on that.
Cool.
Okay.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody. Good luck with
Bye-bye.
your calls.
Yeah. Good luck.